Okay.
Cool. So for this study group, we're going to go over authentication, and I made a little bit of a decision to add in some pieces already. Those pieces that I added in are the user model. So one thing that is new that was not here before is a user controller and a user model. And the reason I went ahead and added that in is because a lot of what we're going to do in authentication, as far as basic sign up and login, is going to be extremely similar to what you did in Sinatra. And we've had a study group over that, and you guys have all mastered that if you passed your projects. So I know that you can handle a sign up. What we're going to mainly focus on today is how do we log in with Omniauth, and what are some of the helper methods that are going to be most useful as you're going through and dealing with authentication, and how do we write those and implement those in Rails. So kind of trying to focus on the big differences. Just to review so that you know going into your own project what you need for authentication is what I went ahead and did is I made a users model. The pieces here that are really important are our username, our email. You can choose which one of those. They just need something that signifies them as logging in. You don't technically need both. Obviously, we need a password digest. I put this in here. We might not use it. If we don't use it, I would remove it from the table. But we also might use it for our authentication because there's a few different ways you can handle it. Usually for Omniauth, you'll end up having something like a UID to keep track of your user data. One thing I would like to point out, and we will come back to this, if you're going to do something like a user ID where you are logging in with Facebook and you use the user ID from Facebook to record which user this is, you do want to put it as a string because I've seen people put them as integers, and if you put it as an integer, you're only allowed to have like 6 digits or something like that, maybe 7 digits. And a lot of the UIDs are much longer than that. So even though they're numerical, they're much longer than what would fit for an integer. And so I tend to just put them as a string. The other piece that I went ahead and added in here, and I'll just go ahead and show you guys, is I added a sign up form. A few things that I did that are just a little bit different because you might have the same issue is we are using a form 4 because we're going to create an object and we're going to create a user object. I did change my URL to post to sign up because I really wanted my URL here to be something like what a user would recognize. And so I made it, there's our local host. This is our sign up form. And then when they actually hit sign up, we'll see, it will also actually post to sign up. And part of the reason I did that too is if it fails, I wanted the URL at the top to still say /sign up. I know that goes a little bit away from RESTful conventions. I have also seen people make this say users/new and you post to users. That choice is yours. You can do either way. I just tend to do it this way because I think it makes more sense to a user. It's what a user would be more familiar with. To set up those routes, don't worry, we're going to add a lot of stuff today, so we'll still be coding. I just wanted to go over what I've already added. To set up those routes, I actually wrote them as custom routes because I chose not to use the RESTful version. If I had chosen to use the RESTful version, I could have just used resources users and actually listed new and create as here, but I wanted some custom routes. By practice, I tend to just put my custom routes first. That's also your choice. And then the really nice part is because we had that errors partial, I could go ahead and just list my errors partial here. And then finally, in my users controller, we had a create action. This create action is very similar to any other create action we've done. So like our shoes controller create, pretty similar. The big difference is that I now include this line, line 10. What is the purpose of line 10?
To persist the user's information throughout your application?
Yeah, to signify that they, yeah, to have it stored in our session hash so that we are signifying to our app this person has successfully authenticated themselves and should be seen as like quote unquote logged in. So this line is essentially logging our user in and allowing it so we can grab that information later on throughout the application. I think those are all of the pieces that I added. One piece that I haven't added because I really wanted to emphasize it with you guys is in my user model, well, I guess I have already added has secure password. I would also need validations. Other things I like to tell people, it's your choice which you're going to validate. If you want to validate for them filling in every field or some of the fields, but for your user, there are certain requirements that must be met because you run into major application issues if you don't validate for uniqueness of one of these attributes. So you get to choose as the developer which attribute are they going to use to log into your app, and whatever attribute that is the one that should be unique. You could also require that they're both unique, but whichever one we choose to log them in with must be required to be unique. So let's say we were going to use username. We would want to add something like validates username uniqueness true. We might also just for the sake of it want to throw in a validates email. Maybe we want both of these to be true. That's up to you. One thing that we're going to run into today, and I will show you how this happens, is sometimes when we do Omniauth, we accidentally actually fail our validations and it throws us off. So one thing to keep in mind is that your validations are going to be in play when we create users here, but they're also going to be in play when we use a third party to create users. So you don't want to forget about any validations you've listed. There is a validation that is built into here. Does anyone know what validation we get automatically with line number 2?
I think it's that the password can't be blank.
Exactly. And as a secondary, if I wanted to add a password confirmation, has secure password would then require that password confirmation was complete. It would also require that the 2 matched. So it's really nice. It builds in for you the ability to do a password confirmation field if you choose to do so. But I just want to emphasize that because sometimes I see people list password or password digest here. You don't need to take care of that. Has secure password does it for you. Okay, so now that we have our user set up, now we actually get to do a little bit of coding. I actually should ask before we get into that, anything I've added so far, or any of you guys who have tried to work through labs and you've tried to create a sign up action, any questions so far about how to handle a sign up?
Quick question on the validation for username uniqueness. How would you add the message for that? Like if it was invalid, right? How would you add your customized message next to that?
I'm such a documentation person that off the top of my head, let me look at my other example. Because I know this one we did a custom one. Let's try, I don't know if this is gonna do it. Message, username has already been taken. I actually don't know. They give you a pretty good custom error message or a regular error message. Let's see if that works. I did sign up one person yesterday and did I put it wrong?
No, yeah, I believe you got it right. That's how they do it.
Okay, we'll see. No matter what, this shouldn't work because we've got all of these and we should see a lot of errors. Oh, or I did something wrong. I did. Uniqueness. Maybe. I actually really don't. I haven't. Let's see. Oh no, now I'm throwing all sorts of issues in. Okay, well clearly that is not right because I'm already getting error messages from it. Uniqueness. Let's see if maybe we just put it here. Maybe I don't need it to even be a hash. Nope. Huh. Okay, well, I'd have to go back and look up my syntax for this. Let's just see what happens if we go without specifying message. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I thought. I would, let me, Nathalbert, only because we have, oh, wait. I've got.
I think it looks like if you want it to be, so you would just say uniqueness and then put the message in a hash. So you wouldn't even have presence true, I don't think. I think that's what the documentation says online. Yeah, let's see if this works.
Oh, looks good. Username, my custom message. It worked. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
There we go. Now we made it really custom. But you'll see we already are getting this password can't be blank without even doing anything extra here. And if we had a password confirmation, it would also say password confirmation can't be blank. And then if they didn't match, we would get that they don't match. And so there are already a lot of things built in. Thank you for looking up that. I know I knew that was going to be the easier way just to look up documentation, but was just going for it. Cool. So moving on, if we do successfully log in, it's going to be a little bit hard as we go through this today to know if something is successful unless we, and I'm going to just make up a username here and put password as my password. Oh, why is that? That shouldn't be showing me my password. Oh, I think I did it as a text field. I went really fast and didn't check this. Where's my users new? Yeah, this should be a password field. And this should be an email field. That's my bad. Now if I'm going to refresh it because I think it's worth showing you the difference here. Now these will be in stars. And now this one, if I didn't have the @ sign, it won't let me sign up because it wants me to have an @ sign there. And I'll go ahead and click sign up. And I'm going to take us to a user show page, which is nice. Like we can see this user show page, but I also am still able to navigate back to sign up and think that I'm not logged in. And that can be a major issue. You want to make it very clear to a user when they're logged in, and you probably want to prevent them from coming back to this page once they are logged in. There are a number of ways to do your helper methods, and I talked to Jesse about this yesterday, and I said I was going to look up kind of the best way, and I feel like the jury's out. So Chris, I'm really curious as your opinion. There are two different ways you can write your helper methods. You can do them as private methods in your application controller and then list them as helper methods, or we can write them in our helpers and include this module. Do you have a preference, Chris?
I was reading about this recently. I think it should go in your application helper. I think that I'm trying to remember the exact situation, but I think it just depends on what the helper is going to do. So if you need the helper specifically in the view or something like that, put it in the helpers Obviously it's like, well, you could probably put it in any controller, but then once it gets too large and you want to separate it out into your application helper, then maybe do that. But if it's also just a helper that you're just going to use in your controller alone and it doesn't need to be used in the view, then you can just make it a private method. I think that's also kind of trying to get into the question of like, should a method be private or should it be a helper?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and one thing I read, that the only reason that I'm a little bit like partial to the application controller is I did read something about when you include these, they're not technically private methods. Is that true? And so then then they could technically be confused and seen as controller actions.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is like the only downside. But yeah, since we'll use them in two places, let's define them here, and I'll just kind of demonstrate it this way. These helper methods, I'm also going to not spend too much time on because you've had helper methods like this before, but they are super useful for what we're going to need. Pretty much every application will need these two helper methods. And as we go through, we'll be able to prove that we logged in with Omniauth. We'll be able to prove we logged in the normal way if we have these two helper methods. So our first helper method, we just want to make sure it returns a true or false value. So there's multiple ways of doing this. One way is we could just check to see if there is a user ID set in the session. Another way that you have seen probably this done is that our logged in actually calls our current user to see, is there a current user? Part of me likes checking to see if there's a current user, just because then we're also guaranteeing that the user ID is a valid user ID. And it's not like a user ID of a user that has been deleted or something of that nature. And so another way I like to do it is we actually set the current user, and don't worry, I'm gonna add some fancier stuff in here in a second. But I like to do something like find by ID, session, user ID. And then I like to add in a little bit of extra stuff because we're probably going to call this method a ton. And if we call it a ton and it only looks like this, every time this method gets called, we access the database. So for example, if in one of my views, and we're going to just use this view as an example, if I wanted to say something like, if this said instead current user, dot username, and then also in my layout I said like maybe at the top we just said something like I don't know why, but we just wanted to display their name, current user dot username, and we start putting this current user in more than one place. What's going to happen is every single time we try to access that, it's going to access the database. And we can kind of see this if we watch here, and I just do a little refresh, as long as I didn't break anything. You can see that it actually does the exact same query more than once. So I think this one actually happened in the controller, but in our view, here we do the same query. And that's not really a great practice. So one way to avoid that is in here, we can memoize our current user. So we can say something like @current user or equals the user found by session. And this is just saying, if we haven't already looked at the database, look at the database and set this variable. If we have already looked at the database, just use the return value of this variable. Notice this time we had 3 queries. If I refresh it, we'll now see that there were only 2 queries. And this first one was just because I have it do something silly, because this was a show page, so it was showing whose page this is. So we'll even say current user just to make it really clear, and then users page. Because that way we could, and I'll change this back to @user. That way we could go to user/1 and we'll see current user and users page. And then it's like those 2 queries made sense in that situation. The other thing I like to do here is I don't want it to query the database if there isn't a session. So it's going to start to look a little convoluted, but I tend to add on if this even exists. So if we even have a session user ID. And if you want to guarantee this is a true value, we can add the double bang, or like a true or a false value, even though nil or something will evaluate to true or false. So in essence, what this is saying is, let's find and set the current user variable based on the session if we have something in the session. If this is written out like so, you could technically call current user here. People have different opinions about this. One negative opinion about doing it this way is we're querying the database when maybe we actually didn't need to display the current user in that view. Maybe all we wanted to do is check to see if we're logged in. Most of the time though, people in their layouts will list the current user. And so most of the time, this isn't actually doing anything extra to your database, but that's up to you how you want to call it. Chris, do you have an opinion?
No, I think that's, yeah.
Okay.
That's how I do it.
Like this first way? Okay, we'll leave it like that for now. Notice that we have already used these in our views. And one last final thing that I want to point out, because it is a mistake that I see sometimes, is do not name this @user, because that's going to cause confusion on a page like this, where Toby is our @user represented by the ID, and Jen is the current user. So if I refresh this page again, now it gave us a really weird result because we set @user before we called current user. And if we had set current user before we called @user, we'd get the opposite result. And so we end up with really weird stuff if this is called @user. So it is really important we call it @current user, but we don't reference this instance variable ever. We always reference the method. And I just want to highlight that because that was something I was super confused about when I first did these. Even though we're setting this instance variable, we always call the method. And this is just a backup way so we don't access the database as much. As I mentioned, all of these we now have access to in our view. And so we probably, to be safe, this is something that's going to break if we're not logged in. So it's always good to add something to say like, if logged in, do all of this stuff. And then a lot of times I'll add like an else. We'll do a link to sign up because they're not logged in, or we could do a link to log in. I just don't have a login path yet. So we'll say link to sign up. And this will, I'm just gonna, I don't know if I actually have the sign up path helper, so I'll just actually list it as sign up. And now we should, it'll be a little bit easier to tell if we're logged in or logged out because we'll have a different nav bar. We still should see the same thing at the moment, but it would change if we were logged out. This would be a great thing to have as like a partial of like my logged in nav bar, my logged out nav bar. And then you could imagine this whole thing being a helper and the helper saying display nav bar and using the logic of if we're logged in, display one, otherwise display the other. In order to use these same things, like if logged in our controller, there's one more step we have to do. This is just a module. So thinking back to very beginning Ruby, what we have to do is we have to include this module. And I'm going to include it in my application controller actually. And so we're just going to include my application helper, which now means that I can use that logged in or current user anywhere in my controllers because all of my controllers inherit from my application controller. So I can come into, for example, this route, I said we probably shouldn't be able to access if we're logged in. So we could say something like if logged in, redirect to, I don't even know where we want to redirect to, maybe the user path for our current user. Otherwise, we'll go through the normal process and we'll render what we should be able to render. And so let's come and let's see now what happens if we go to sign up. See, it tried to go to sign up, and we can see that down here. Where is it? Here we tried to do sign up, but it said, oh, look, they're logged in, so it redirected us. And so code like this we can now implement because we've brought in our application helpers. So we now have access to those. Cool. The next and final piece we have to do before we switch over to Omniauth is it's going to be important that we include how to log out. And so we need to give ourselves a way to log out. We also are going to need a way to log in, but I care first about us being able to log out. Logging in, logging out, and like Omniauth, all of those things are going to be handled by our sessions controller. We don't have a model called sessions, but these are routes that don't really fit into the user's routes because we're not creating a user, we're not editing a user, but we do want to, what we're really editing or updating or deleting is we're editing, updating, and deleting the session. And so because of that, we add a sessions controller that will take care of anything having to deal with our session. So I'm going to even add Omniauth login here as well. And so if we want a logout method, one of the big differences between what we did in Sinatra and what we did now is in Sinatra, we could log out just by going like this in the URL. We don't really want that to be the case anymore. That's not really proper. Typically, when we are trying to delete something in the database, we actually want to send a delete request. And usually when we send a delete request, what's the matching action in the controller?
Destroy.
Yes. And I always get confused by those. But so our logout is now going to be handled by a destroy. And for us to make this work, we're going to have to add some routes. And so we will go ahead and name this as delete. Delete is the type of request we want. And we can call this logout if we want, because that makes sense. And we'll send it to our sessions controller and our destroy action. So here we have our option for logging out. It still won't work with this because that is not a route, but we should now see, what is this? Sorry to see, we should now see that we have a logout path, and we have a logout path helper that will take us to our sessions destroy action. So now what we need to do if we want this to be able to be successful is we are going to need a link. So let's go back to a page we do have access to, and let's add a link to the top here that says log out, because we should only log out if we are logged in. So it's something that we should only be able to see if we are in this logged in session. So let's just add another link too. This one's going to be a little bit different than most of our others. And I'm going to do it wrong the first way, the first time, just because this is a really normal error that I see most people get. Most people will just write link to logout path, because we saw that that was a helper we could use. We will now have the link. When I click on the link, does anyone have a prediction about the error I will see? It's okay if not.
Like an error, like no get path to log out, because you're trying to get, yeah.
Great job. Yeah, so it's still making a get request, and we need to change it to actually making a delete request. And I believe we have done this elsewhere, but essentially, and actually, it's a good thing we've done it elsewhere because I might need to double check what the syntax is. But we need to override what the method is going to be. And so I think it just looks like this. Put delete in quotes, maybe. Let's see. I might have a syntax error. We might have to look at our other example. I think that worked. I mean, I know I could just click it and see, but I'm a big fan of actually looking at what this gives us now. Yeah, so we have this relative no follow data method delete. And so it's going to override our get request and change it to a delete request for us. And so that should work. That will send us in here. What did we do in Sinatra when we were trying to log someone out?
We'll do like a sessions clear, but it's definitely different here.
Why do you say it's definitely different here?
I'm guessing it is because when I was reading something, I saw that there was a different. I mean, I guess you could do the same thing, but I saw something different as well too. I guess you could do either way, right? So you could probably do sessions that's clear, and you could probably do session dot delete and then the what's you call it, the attribute that you're deleting.
Yeah, you're right. There's a few ways to do it because session clear is going to clear everything, and you might be in a situation where you don't want to clear everything. Like you just might want to clear that they're logged out, but for some reason you might want to save the last item. Like if it was a store, you might want to remember some of the last items that they viewed or something like that, so then you can have those be on the forefront the next time that they visit that site or something like that. And so if you didn't want to clear the whole thing, you could actually delete just that key and value pair. I tend to just use session clear because at the moment I don't have any need to save other info. But you are right, Nath Albert, you can do it differently. And because there are so many differences, I actually am curious. I know I've asked you this a lot, Chris, but there's just so many different ways to do things. Do you have a preference?
Between session clear and resetting it or using the redirect?
Between session clear or like doing like a session and trying to delete just the user ID.
I just delete the user ID. I don't do clear.
Okay, so you do it like, is this the syntax for it? This is why I don't,
Yeah, I think it's like that.
We'll test it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then we'll redirect back to somewhere where they should be able to have access. So the sign up path, and I still probably should look if we have a path helper for that, and I'm not sure. So we'll just redirect to sign up. So let's try it and see what happens. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It didn't work. Oh, it's still, I don't think no, I did refresh the page. I think it might be because I took out my turbo links. Shoot. It is. I don't know if you guys remember, but early on there was a time where I took out our link to JavaScript, and you need JavaScript to get that to work, because otherwise you have to do it as a form. Shoot, why did I take that out so quickly?
Why did you take it out?
I took it out because something weird was happening where it wasn't.
Right, with the errors weren't showing up.
Yeah, because it wasn't re-rendering my new thing. And I knew that was what was causing it, but I probably should have, I've got an example JavaScript tag we can try putting back in here. Let's see what happens. Don't break everything. Oh, it did. Come on. Shoot. Okay, I'm gonna get this fixed, and I'll show you guys tomorrow how I fix it. But instead, let's make a quick form tag, just like Brandon said, because that's going to be our easier way to handle this. And I want to get to the
Actually, I have maybe a request. Is that could you show us how to potentially do the form with? Because that's something I was wondering about.
Yes. So we can
It's
try
okay
to
if
do this.
you don't want to right now.
Well, I do have it as an example for one of these. I think my shoes form is a form with. Yeah.
I know how to do it for a model. I forgot how to do it if you're not doing it for a model.
You know what? Let's just try it. I think it's like this. Do F. We'll see. It might not be like this, but we'll. And then we just need, instead of this being linked to, we will have an f.submit that will say log out. Let's see if I broke something. Oh, we got a logout button. It looks messy, but it's there. Let's see what happens when I click it. Perfect.
Yay.
There you go. We got a quick little example of form with.
Thanks.
No problem. Thanks for asking that. Forcing me out of my comfort zone. So now that we're backlogged out, now we get to do the fun stuff, and that is to add in Omniauth. I know probably I should also do login, but I think Omniauth is the harder one, and I just want to make sure that we cover that in a study group. I also know curriculum-wise, it covers a certain way of doing Omniauth, and I think it's important to see another set of documentation. And so at the basis of using Omniauth, it's the ability for us to allow a third party to handle both our signing up and our logging in, so that we don't have to record, or we don't have to be the keeper of passwords for users, but we can rely on another site saying, yes, they've been authenticated. So it basically takes the security of keeping track of passwords off of your hands. I'm going to go ahead and walk you through a Google Omniauth, because I think a lot of people really like to add logging in with Google. And I want to just show you how it works. So what I'm going to be using as my guide today, I'll actually bring it over here, is we're going to be using this blog that was written by a former student that walks you through how to do it. But in general, and I really can't stress this enough, any type of Omniauth you do is really going to be following documentation. And so you can do it for like any site that offers it, as long as you want to follow the documentation well. In order for us to get Omniauth to work, there are gems that it relies upon. And I have already bundled, because my bundle takes a long time when I'm on here. But so the first gem that you're going to need to use is this Omniauth gem that just enables you to use Omniauth in general. The second one is a .env, and there is a push to actually go away from this and use your master key and your credentials that are already built in to Rails 5 and higher. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys with .env, because that's the way our curriculum does it. And a lot of documentation is actually, like the GitHub documentation still uses env, and a lot of things still use this. So to reduce confusion, I'm going to cover it this way, but I will put a plug out there. If you're curious about the other way, come to office hours on Friday and we can go over it, because I've done it both ways before. And then the next thing is we would want to add any gems for the Omniauth that we're doing. Just in case we had time, I have both of these added in there, both Google and GitHub. Typically, you'll find they're all Omniauth dash whatever they call their Omniauth, whether it's Facebook, Google OAuth 2, or GitHub. And then these have already been added in. As an extra, and I didn't mention this before, most Rails apps, when you start them, start with this gem commented out. So you do want to make sure you comment it in trying to use has secure password. But that's something that we've been familiar with in Sinatra, so I didn't think it would be that big of a stress to do it here. The next piece that we're going to need to add in here is, and we should actually have our initializer, we'll have to add an Omniauth initializer, and we'll also need to make sure we have a .env file. And I do want to stress to you guys, your .env file is not something that is going to be pushed to GitHub. It is a local place on your computer to store it. And it is incredibly important that it is the top level of your application. So you want to make sure that you can collapse your app folder and all of your other folders and still see it. And I emphasize that because the number one issue I see people have is their .env is hidden in one of these files. Another thing is, as soon as you create a .env file, it's really important that you come down to your git ignore and that you add it as something that we are going to ignore. Usually, I thought it would change the way this looks on here, but maybe it won't. Do this before you push anything, because if you would do it too late, you'll have already pushed your secret keys to GitHub. In emphasizing this, I also want to say I've seen people that like right before their project review are like, let me clone down a new copy of my project so that it's fresh. If you do that, you will lose your .env file because it will not be pushed to GitHub and your Omniauth will break. So just know your .env is something that will only be saved locally on your computer. I will probably, after we're done, make a sample .env so that I can push it to GitHub so you can see what it looks like. The other pieces that we need to add for this is we're gonna have to add some routes. And so going through here, and I probably should emphasize this because this is pretty straightforward about what you actually need to do, is we will add a route to our route file. Where's our route file? I closed everything. And we'll need to add a route that basically accepts a callback from Omniauth. And so it's going to be receiving what we get back from our Omniauth server. And as we have in here, I'm going in a different order. We'll basically be accepting this. And yours doesn't have to look exactly like this, but if you want to offer more than one way of logging in, most people will list this as provider so that it could be auth Google callback, auth Facebook callback, auth GitHub callback, and you've used one route and made it dynamic. You could also just actually say auth Google. This just makes it a little bit more flexible, and then we'll send it to our sessions controller, and we would need an action called Omniauth. There is another little kind of debate out there of the best way to handle this. I prefer making a custom action to be really specific, and I think it makes your life a little bit easier. You will see some people that actually send this to sessions create and have logic in their controller of, if you've logged in with Omniauth, handle it one way. If this is a post request or we're receiving a request from submitting a form, handle it a different way. And so you will see that where there's like a little bit of a difference there. I'm just partial to keeping it separate. I think it makes your controller look a little bit cleaner and having one action that just deals with Omniauth. So basically making a custom action as we did with expensive down here. The next piece that we're gonna need to add is we will want to go to, let's go to our Google page. So I'll bring this over here. And I just went to the, just to show you the link, I went to the console developers google.com into my dashboard. And I do believe, yeah. So I probably should have started it from the very beginning. It makes you go through a few things when you start a new project. Let me actually click what that looks like. It'll let me start a new project. And so we will call this project Get Money. And we'll go ahead and create it. So that I'm actually going from the beginning if you were to do Google. Although this might take a second. There we go. And now once we're here, we're kind of on our main project page. And this is where we're gonna want to then add an Omniauth login. And this is terrible, but I actually haven't gone back to this main front page in a long time. And now I'm like forgetting where I start with. I think it's project settings. We'll see. I don't know if that's actually where it is. We're here, we're here. This is terrible. I should have used the easy. GitHub is the easiest one. That's why I wanted to do this one because it's not as easy. Let's go back to my documentation. And I don't do this that often. So we need to go to credentials and then create credentials. Why do I not see credentials? Did they change this? feel like I'm going crazy. I've done this so many times.
Yeah, they do change this a lot.
Where is my ability to create credentials? I know, and that's one thing actually you'll find kind of sometimes frustrating about the labs is the screens, and I know Anna pointed this out, might not look exactly like the images that they sent you. You know what, it might be, if I go back here, it might be add. Nope, that's not what I want. Here we go. I think this is where I need to be. I just don't see anything that actually says credentials. Guys. I swear I've done this before, guys, but we might have to do GitHub. And I might have to come back and send you guys out a new way of doing this because it looks like they've changed it. I also feel like it's probably something really simple that I'm just missing. Anyone see anything?
Yeah, what about go to project settings under project info there up at the top?
You know, I think this is where I was a second ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe cryptographic keys.
Yeah.
Maybe they've changed the name of it. Instead of credentials, cryptographic keys. Nope, that's not what I want. Nothing that is pricing.
Create credentials, create OAuth client ID.
This like looks so, this is terrible because this looks so different than what I've done before.
Yeah. Maybe identity and organization. Oh.
So I just was able to paste something in the chat. Hopefully that can possibly help route us to credentials.
Let me see. If not, I can get the GitHub one done in 10 minutes because the GitHub one is pretty straightforward.
That
I
might be
think
it.
I found it.
Did you Google that?
This is what I wanted to see. Why were we not seeing this? This is exactly where I wanted to be. Thank you. I don't know how I missed. Oh, you know what? I think somewhere we did see API services, and I think like if we went back here, and I just wasn't thinking of it as an API service. So it's probably we needed to go, because I just want you to be able to get there if you do the same thing. Probably needed to go here. Yes. Okay. Okay. So we needed, that was the step I was missing, is we needed to go to API services, and then we go to credentials. And then we will create credentials for an OAuth client ID. There we go. Back on track. Thank you. It does, this is why I usually do it in ahead of time, is it makes you configure this screen. It really doesn't matter what you put on this screen. It's gonna like ask for a whole bunch of stuff. A logo, I don't think it's gonna necessarily need us to have a logo. I just want us to, let's see what things it requires. Oh, that's all we needed, cool. And then we'll come back to credentials. Create credentials, OAuth client ID. For a web application, I'm gonna call it get money again. And this is the part that matters of our authorized redirect URLs. So we want our authorized redirect URL to match this route that we just made. So we want our authorized redirect URL to basically take us to here, but we want it to take us to localhost 3000. I did that wrong. Localhost : I don't have so many things, 3000/auth, and then in here we would actually fill in what it is. So like we see here, it'll be Google OAuth 2. Did I spell that right, or does it have a U in it? OAuth 2. And let me add an HTTP. is it just like that? This is where I'm like I'm going crazy with my HTTP.
It doesn't look like you
/
need the second underscore before the 2 and OAuth 2.
I think I just Google OAuth. Oh, I see what you're saying. The second one. Yep. HTTP. Guys, I need those little things. Or just there we go. We got it. We got it. That shouldn't have been as hard as it was. And so we'll go ahead and create this in here. And then it gives us this wonderful client ID that is really important that we come over and copy. And we'll take it to our .env. And we can name these whatever we want, but I'll call it Google Client. And I'll paste it, and then we'll do Google Secret. And I will paste this one. And now we have both of these that we can use when we actually add an Omniauth initializer. Cool. So those should be good. And then we'll come up here to our initializers, and we need an omniauth.rb. And in our Omniauth.rb, you have this in your documentation, I should say. You have this in your labs, and I tend to honestly always copy it because I just have to. I think I was supposed to already have an Omniauth.rb. No? Maybe I was supposed to create it. And basically what these will need to do is they need to match exactly your ENV. So I just called mine Google Client and Google Secret. So I need to change this to say Google Client and Google Secret. And this will link our provider to OAuth 2. And this is something where you will need to restart your server for. And so if you have issues with it working, please know that this is one of those few pieces that restarting your server is going to matter. And then our last and final piece that we need to add in before we can process it in here, so I'm going to put a binding pry, is we are going to need to add a link so that we can log in. So let's go back to our app and our layouts. And we'll make this another link if we are not signed up. So we'll say log in with Google. And our route for this is going to be auth/Google OAuth 2, I believe, but let me just check because that's something that I kind of get off a little bit. Auth Google OAuth 2, that looks right. Yep, cool. And now we should see a link here, and we are almost done. That's gonna throw some errors. Oh, I forgot, I restarted my server. And then when we click it, what should happen is we'll be able to make it through to our sessions controller, and here in our sessions controller, we'll handle our request. And so the last piece that I will set up that you'll see is basically when you get a request back, this is what it looks like. And we can call it using this really long thing. That's just long, and we don't like using long pieces of code. So what you'll normally see added is a private method just to give us something a little bit simpler, just AUTH to reference the response that we get back. And so now we'll have that as part of our response. And our server has started. Sorry guys, I'm a little all over the place with this right now. And we will log in with Google, cross our fingers that we had our binding pry. This looks good too. I want to just emphasize, if you guys saw that client ID equals, if you run into any errors and you see client ID equals question mark and there's no numbers, that means that something from your ENV file is not coming through. And that's probably the #1 error that people have, is that you don't see that client ID equals. So this URL is super important as you're logging through. And I have so many email accounts. Let's just choose one of them. Oh, I restricted this to users within my organization, which means with my own login account. And I think I made it through Flatiron School, so let's see. I have a lot of email accounts. So when, I don't know if you guys saw it, I was going through these pretty fast, but there was a moment where I restricted this to just internal accounts. And that meant I restricted it to just people with my email. And I probably should have made it so that it could have been open to outside people as well. Gosh, I don't even know where I said that.
It might be in your pry now.
I saw somewhere where it said flatironschool.com.
Make external. So this is what I need to click is make external if I want other people to be able to use it. But for now, this is working and we're in our pry. So let's take a look. And so we get this huge response back, and the response is going to come with a lot of info. It's up to you to decide which info you want to use for your app. I will warn you, the number one mistake that I see is you've required an email and you've required a username and you've required them to be unique, and you've already signed up with an email, and then you use your Google OAuth and you try to re-sign up with that same email and it doesn't work. Number one issue I see. And so just keep that in mind. The idea here is not that you sign up using the app and then you use Google. The idea is you use one or the other. So if you're already signed up without using Google, you should continue to sign up without using Google. Or if you choose to sign up using Google, you should always sign up using Google, is kind of the idea. When we handle this, what we're going to do, and it actually is a little bit better if we take this code and we put it into another method, but essentially we're going to want to find or create a user. And we can find or create by, and you want it to be something that's unique. So you are going to see in this example, and I know I'm like at time and I'm going to end us. You'll see in this example here that they actually have done this a little bit different with the first or initialize, but they're finding it by the email because they wanted it to find people that have already logged into their program with their email. This is acceptable. It's a little bit not as secure in my opinion, but it does mean if my email address was attached to GitHub and my email address was attached to Google and I logged in separately, all three of those would be appropriate ways for me to it would be able to find my user using my email in all three of those examples. A more secure way, in the way that your lab kind of goes through, is we actually use UID. And if you notice from our pry, we get a UID, and almost all auth providers have some sort of UID. And so we would access this by saying auth. And it's just a hash. So we can access this just auth UID, and we get that number back. That ensures that this is a unique instance that we haven't had before. And then we get this great do block where in this find or create, this is the thing it's finding it by, but we can also set other attributes. So I can set my username and I can set my email. And the most important part that you will probably need for your project is you must set a password, because remember, has secure password by default requires passwords. And so I would come through here and I might choose to do my email for both of these. So it looks like it's nested under info. So it looks like I should be able to say info, and then username, not username, email. And there's my email. It is acceptable. You get to choose what you want these to be. I'm doing this, no, I am doing that right. And I could make both of those email if I wanted. The best way to do your password is actually this thing called secure random hex. I think that was in this as well, somewhere in here. Yeah, secure random hex is basically going to give us a random password, because we don't want to set their password to something that's hackable. They're not going to ever use their password to log in. We just need to give them something so that it's secure and so that they can continue to log in using their Google password and access this. And I think that throws a lot of people off. Let's see if this works, because we're at 9 and I want to 9 my time. And I kind of guessed on a lot of this, so we'll see. And then I'm going to go ahead and put their session user ID as at user.id and redirect to user path at user. One other thing to note is UID is different than ID, because you never want to manipulate the ID. We still want this user to be our third user in the database, even though their UID was something crazy long. So make sure you realize that those are two different things. Let's take out the pry and let's see what happens. We're probably gonna have to redo it. Yep. So I'll choose my Flatiron one. Fingers crossed this works, because I never usually do it that fast. We're there. We have a current user. We're Jennifer at flatironschool.com, and we can go view other pages and we can log out. If this has worked correctly, I should be able to log out and log back in and then be that same person and not a new person. And see, notice there's my client ID equals. You always want to see that. I have way too many Google accounts, and we're back in, and it's still users 3. So that's a good thing to check, is make sure it's not creating a new person every time. If I had already used this email address for someone else, this would have broken and it would not have created a user. And so we would have wanted some code in here to make sure that this found, like, this was a successful save before we actually did all of this. So it would look a little bit more like if at user.save or .valid, because we've already tried to save it. It's probably more appropriate. Then do this, else maybe redirect with an error message to say that username's already been taken, or that email's already been taken, or to look at the like errors, because it's still going to have errors if it's invalid, and to use those as a flash message. Sorry guys, that was so fast. I know you guys have places to be, and so I want to let you go. Any burning questions before we end this? I'm sorry.
Burning question. The secure random hex, right? It's not salted, so it's possible you could get hacked. Is that true?
This is still password, and so when it gets saved, it will still turn into password digest. Yep, this is just like a random string, so it's more secure than us writing like password, you know, or something like that, like setting everyone to have like it's like we're giving them a random password that's really long that then gets salted and hashed and saved in the database. Yes. Cool. Awesome. I'll let you guys go. If you have other questions, put them in the chat. I'll post this code and then clean it up a little bit before I do. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.